Hey everyone, welcome back to History in a Nutshell. Today, we're diving into a haunting piece of history, how a humble potato could trigger deadly disasters in Ireland. From a simple food to famine and social unrest, we'll explore how this unassuming tuber left a mark on the lives of millions. Let's get into it. Take a moment to look at the humble potato. You can boil it, mash it, roast it, fry it, put it in a stew, or even ferment it. It's versatile, filling, easy to grow, and packed with enough nutrients to sustain life. Yet for Ireland, relying on this simple tuber often turned into a curse. Most famously, the potato became the center of disaster during the Great Famine between 1845 and 1852. But that wasn't the only time the Irish faced starvation. Let's rewind a century to 1739. That year, the weather turned against Ireland. September brought heavy rain, followed by an unusually dry and bitterly cold October. Then came the Great Frost, the coldest winter of the century across Europe. Temperatures plunged, fuel became scarce, and many people died from hypothermia. Even the River Shannon froze, something that hasn't happened since. When the thaw finally arrived in February, it revealed a deeper crisis. The freezing had destroyed most of the potato crop. There were no emergency grain stores, and the few potatoes left in storage had rotted. Even the seed potatoes critical for planting the next crop were ruined. Replacing them would be nearly impossible. To make matters worse, the following winter and spring were unusually dry, with eyewitness George Fawlner noting that it didn't rain from Christmas until April. Despite this disaster, there was no famine in England or Scotland, showing just how little priority Ireland had in the eyes of the empire. Potatoes weren't the only casualties. Other crops, like wheat, failed as well, and the harsh conditions made replanting nearly impossible. Food prices skyrocketed, wheat tripled in price, and other staples followed suit. Livestock suffered too, leaving communities desperate and struggling to survive. The drought didn't just ruin crops, it also wiped out fodder for sheep, cows, and other livestock. According to eyewitness George Fawlner, over 40,000 sheep died in just 2 months in the province of Connaught, Western Ireland. Unsurprisingly, the poor suffered the most. With their food stores destroyed, desperation set in. Daily rations dropped sharply, and people were forced to eat whatever they could find. Potatoes that would normally be considered inedible were eaten anyway. Spoiled milk, stinging nettles, and other unpalatable, or even unsafe foods became a lifeline. With such a limited and poor quality diet, disease spread rapidly. Dysentery outbreaks swept across the country, and in some areas, people were being buried daily with no end in sight. Meanwhile, food like butter, beef, barley, malt, and hake was still being exported, often to feed British soldiers abroad, including during the War of Jenkins' Ear, rather than helping the starving at home. Desperation also fueled crime and unrest. Riots broke out, many were injured or killed, and food was seized in the chaos. Theft became so common that jails overflowed with people simply trying to survive. To ease overcrowding, many were shipped off to the New World as punishment. Government relief was almost non-existent. Aid came mainly from local clergy, church officials, and wealthy landowners. In Waterford, for example, the local gentry set up a food distribution system that fed about 1,800 people a day. Other towns and villages, like Castlebar, tried similar efforts collecting donations, buying food, and giving it to the needy. Some wealthy landowners even launched public works projects to provide jobs and keep people employed. But despite these efforts, help was sporadic and uncoordinated, leaving millions of Irish families to face starvation and disease largely on their own. Some food did make it into Ireland from abroad, but most of it stayed in coastal towns and cities, barely reaching the rural interior. The weather in 1740 remained dry and harsh, and whatever crops farmers managed to plant mostly failed from the lack of rain. That winter brought extreme cold, killing off whatever little survived. By 1741, conditions were worsening. Famine and disease were taking more lives every day, and desperation boiled over into violent food riots. The most infamous incident happened on April 25, 1741, when starving peasants attacked a boat carrying oats to Waterford City. They managed to seize 60 barrels, but tragically, 5 people were killed and 11 injured in the chaos. Relief finally began to arrive in mid-1741. In June, 5 grain ships docked in Galway, bringing much-needed supplies. By July, grain prices returned to pre-famine levels, giving the population a fighting chance. In September, a series of severe storms caused flooding, but afterward, the weather stabilized. The following winter was mild, crops could be planted again, and the famine finally came to an end. The Irish called this disaster Binnanar, or the Year of the Slaughter. Estimates suggest that around 400,000 people died from starvation or disease, roughly 15% of the population at the time, even higher proportion than during the mid-1800s Great Famine. Unlike the Great Famine, however, this earlier crisis didn't trigger mass immigration. Some people did leave or were deported for crimes, but the majority couldn't afford to leave, which meant the population decline was devastating locally, but didn't reshape Irish society on a global scale. After the 1740s famine, Ireland's economy bounced back relatively quickly once the weather stabilized. But the famines of the 1740s and later the 1840s left an unprecedented mark of death and suffering in Irish history. And the crisis didn't end there. Fast forward to 1879, just a few decades after the Great Famine, and Ireland was hit again by widespread crop failures. Poor weather and a resurgence of the potato blight familiar from the previous famine-destroyed harvests across much of the country, especially in the West, where many still depended heavily on potatoes. Thankfully, this famine was far less deadly. Expanded rail networks allowed food and supplies to reach affected areas quickly. On top of that, Ireland received more assistance from both the British government and international allies. The large Irish community in the United States mobilized immediately, determined to prevent a repeat of past suffering. Newspapers followed the crisis closely, and the New York Herald helped coordinate relief efforts, raising $200,000 in donations. In March 1880, the USS Constellation delivered 3,300 barrels of food and clothing, helping avert a major disaster. Deaths were few, and mass migration was largely avoided, but the famine had major social and political repercussions. At the time, up to 97% of Irish farmland was owned by large landlords and rented out to tenant farmers. When the famine hit, many tenants couldn't pay rent. While some landlords waived payments, others demanded money from farmers who had nothing to give. Frustration boiled over, and Irish farmers began organizing through the Land League, led by nationalists Michael DeWitt and Charles Stewart Parnell. They launched coordinated campaigns, pushing for rent reductions and land reforms, marking a key step toward Irish independence. One infamous example was land agent Charles Cunningham Boycott, whose refusal to lower rents and eviction of struggling tenants gave rise to the term boycott, still used today. Fed up with his harsh treatment, the tenants on his lands refused to work until fairer conditions were met. That's how the word boycott was born, and all of it traced back to the humble potato. Thanks for watching. If you found this story fascinating and want to uncover more shocking yet little-known events from history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts on the Year of the Slaughter and the lessons Ireland endured. See you in the next one.